So next topic in unit 5 is socket programming. So here you have theoretical topic as well as lab program. So theory wise we will see what is socket programming and what are the different how to write the socket programming, and then you have a lab program related to this topic saying that monitoring data remotely using TCP or UDP protocol. So first we will see what is socket programming. So socket programming is a way of connecting two different nodes on a network to communicate with each other. So for doing this we have two different types of programming, like TCP you can use or UDP you can use. So the main functions in system/socket.h library are, these are the functions that we are going to use. Socket is one of the function: bind, listen, connect, accept, send or receive, send to, receive from, and then close. So these are some of the main functions that you are going to use in socket programming. So to understand this socket programming, we will take the analogy of telephone. So here system function for socket programming: user 1 and user 2. User 1 want to communicate with user 2 using telephone. So first is we are using socket method in order to create the connection between the user 1 and user 2. So using this socket function you are going to create a socket. That means you are creating a communication between one endpoint to another endpoint. Next is a bind method. What is the bind method here in telephone analogy is you are going to assign some socket address, meaning here you are going to give one unique telephone number in order to connect to user 2. And next connect method. So connect method is you are dialing a number, 10-digit number in order to connect to the client. And then listen is a method where you are waiting for the user 2 to connect to your line, waiting for the connection. Next, accepting the connection. When the user 2 picks up the phone, then the connection is established between user 1 and user 2. Next process will be exchanging the data. So exchanging the data you can use either send or receive methods for exchanging data between user 1 and user 2. Once the communication is completed, you are going to end the communication using close method. So these methods we will see in detail again. So in order to understand the socket programming, connecting the endpoints means from one user to another user, we have taken this telephone example. So next you are going to see two types of socket flows: TCP socket flow and UDP socket flow. So TCP socket flow is connection oriented socket flow. So here you have client and server who is going to communicate with each other. So in TCP socket programming we are going to use a client server architecture. In TCP socket programming, client and server programs are written separately. So first in the server you have different methods like socket, bind, listen, accept, receive, send, and then close. In the same way, client also have some methods like socket, connect, send, receive, and close. So how we are going to see each one method in detail. So first the server side, server will create a socket using the socket function. After creating it, it will bind. What is the meaning of bind function is, here it is going to bind all the services which are running in the server machine. That means in order to connect to the client, you have to use the bind function where the server will bind IP address and port number with some specific services. Next is the purpose of listen is listen incoming connection from the client. So server can handle multiple number of clients at a time. After that you will be having an accept method. So accept method will be blocked until the connection is been created from the client side. So for the client to create a connection, first he should create a socket function. Using socket function a socket is created, and then next he is going to use a connect method. So using connect method the client is trying to connect to the server port. So after receiving the connection request, at that particular time the accept function will be executed at the server side. When the accept function will execute when the client is creating the connection. So it means when the client is using the accept function, that means the connection is created between client and server. Now after creating the connection, the next process is to transfer the data. So here we can do that using read or write functions or send or receive functions at both client and server ends. First client will send request to the server. Server will take that request, it will process that request, execute that request, and after doing that it will use send function or write function to the client, and now the client receives the reply from the server. So in this flow, whatever we have learned in this flow, write means sending the function, read means receiving the function. So write is being used by the server, then read is being used by the client. So after exchanging the data, if this can be done in a loop, continuously data can be exchanged. If you think the exchange of the data is been completed, then you are going to use close function at both client and server side. So this was TCP connection flow. And next, UDP socket flow. UDP is connectionless protocol. Here also you have two methods like server and client. Server is consisting of different methods like same socket bind, but here you have receive from, send to, and then close. At client side you have methods like socket bind, send to, receive from, and then close. So how UDP socket flow will happen? Same as TCP socket programming, it is going to use client server architecture, and you have client and server both separate programs should be written. Socket is created at both client side as well as server side. Next, bind function is used to bind the IP address and port number with some specific services which are going to run on server. Next, you are going to use receive from function. Receive from function is blocked until the datagram received from the client. That means you are waiting for the client to create a connection. Until that time, receive function will be blocked. If the client connection is been established, then receive function will be activated. Here, accept and listen functions, unless TCP, accept and listen functions are not used in UDP, because UDP provides a connectionless service. Next, in client programming, first client will create a socket function, and then at the client side it will use send to function to send a request to the server. First, the server will receive that request and process the request. After processing the request, it will send a reply to the client. Client will wait for the reply. Once the client reaches the reply, it will receive through receive from function. Next, when client receives all the request from the data to the server, then what the client will use a close function. That means all the data from the server has been sent to the client. After that, client will close the connection. Now server will be waiting, is there anything data to be sent from the client? It will be in the waiting stage. If the suppose client is not asking any request, then automatically the server will close the at the server side. So this is the flow in UDP. So this is in a theoretical format. Same thing, same methods you are going to write in the programming format. So socket programming is basically two-way communication between two nodes in a network. So for creating the socket, this is the line we are going to use in the program. S is equal to socket dot socket. Argument here is socket family, socket type, and protocol. Socket family is what type of operating system, Unix operating system, or what type of the IP address, whether IPv4, IPv6, what is that you are using, we are going to mention in socket family. And then socket type, whether you want connection oriented or connectionless oriented, sock stream or sock datagram. Next, we will set default protocol as 0. So this is the server program. First, you need to import socket methods or socket libraries. In order to use all the methods, you need to first import socket library. Next, creating the socket at the server side is the first step. So sock is equal to socket dot socket, socket AFINET, and we are using socket sock datagram. So we are binding the socket to the port number. Next, what is the server address to which I want to connect? You are going to mention the IP address of the server. Next, sock dot bind. With this IP address, you are going to bind it with the client. So after connection, you are going to send the data. So sending the data is being done continuously. That's why we are keeping it in while loop. While true, data address socket receive from. This is the port number to which client I want to connect. So what is the data I want to send? For that, I am creating a text file called as dialog.txt file as F. F is a file, which means dialog.txt. text. So in dialog.txt we are going to write some content into that. This content of data we want to send it to the client which is having this particular port number. So the message whatever you are writing is in string format, in the bracket you are writing data, and F you are opening that file and writing the message into that file, and whatever the message you are writing you are trying to print that file, print the message in that particular file and then close the connection. So this is the code for the client program. Same thing for the socket client programming, same thing you are going to write import socket, import sys. Sys is a library again. Here with the sensor you are trying to connect the data, and whatever the data you are connecting you are sending it to the server, and some dashboard you are going to print it. So for that what we are using, import rpi.gpio as GPIO from time. We are using this program with the Raspberry Pi using the DTH sensor. DTH sensor will sense the temperature and humidity around the environment, and whatever it has been detected we are storing in the dialog.txt, that it has been read and we are displaying onto the monitor. So for that we are writing the program like, in order to use DTH we need a Adafruit library. This we have already seen. Import Adafruit underscore DHT, and you define a method called as sensor data, where all the data from the DHT is collected in sensor data function. GPI.set mode you are setting it BCM numbering scheme. GPI.set warnings false. In order not to get the warnings in the output window you are using this method. Next, sensor is equal to Adafruit DHT.DH22. That means DH222 is a sensor that I am using as a sensor in this particular program. In order to identify that we are writing dot DHT22. Next, using this DHT humidity and temperature is been read using ADA DHT dot read retry sensor comma 4. 4 is a pin from which you are connecting the input. Next, return whatever the humidity temperature values you have collected. So for this, in order to do this you need to connect it to the server. Sock is equal to socket.socket socket, and then what is the connection, sock.dggram. Here we are creating UDP connection. You can try it with TCP also. And what is the server address you are going to mention here. Next, for collecting the data it is done continuously. That's why again we are trying to take it in while loop. H is humidity, T is temperature. It is been collected, values are collected using sensor data method, and what are the message you are getting, concatenating both values, that is humidity value and temperature value, both we are trying to print it on the output window. So print the what are the message you are getting, and then send the message to the server address. The server will again encode the message, and finally what is been the message it is been collected from the sensor will be printing on the output window. After communication is end, we are saying closing the connection, that is sock.close is a method to close the communication between server and the client. So the output you are going to get it like this. Here combinedly you are going to get humidity and the temperature values. Here you can see client side this will be the data, server side this will be the data displayed, and at the client side this is the client side where we are going to see it on our laptop, to which we have connected the Raspberry Pi. These are the display values, that is humidity and temperature values. So using this DTH2 we are trying to connect socket programming. Thank you.